All right, guys, so let's get started. So we are in our second to last cohort-wide training, if you can believe it. I feel like a lot of us were just in West Virginia a few days ago. My, how time flies, right? Um, Today's topic is all about fiscal basics and budgeting. We have a few presenters that will be delivering this content. And as always, if you have questions, please come off mute, drop in the chat, raise your virtual hand. This is your time to ask all of those questions, even posing them to the group for anyone that may have an answer or has tackled this within their own organizations. This training is for you. So just quickly run through our agenda here. We're gonna, welcome everyone to the space as always. Did that with a nice walk-on song. We're gonna recap last session's training just quickly, and then we're gonna jump right into funding alignment. We're gonna talk a little bit about budgeting for E&T, and then there'll be some time for questions. But again, please ask questions throughout the presentation if you have them. Just our norms, take care of yourself. If you need to pause and get some water, ask questions, please be present and participate. We have some questions that we'll ask you to come off mute or drop in the chat. Again, any questions, all questions are welcome. There is no question that is too small, too silly. Just please, this training is for you. So capacity review, I just have a couple of slides that I took from our last presentation. So we typically talk about capacity to run an E&T program with like 6 bucketed areas. So you have to track participants' participation, you have to report on it. There's documentation infrastructure that you have to have set up, which we talked about last time. It's also recorded on our landing page if you weren't able to attend or need a refresher. Policies and procedures that you need to have in place, which a lot of you already do. They just might need some slight tweaks or edits or updates. Fiscal infrastructure, which I would say is very critical in the capacity area here, tracking your costs, participant files, attendance records, things like that. And then how you curate your invoices and making sure all the folks that are involved are at the table. So I like to say SNAP employment and training forces everyone to play nicely together. So if you don't normally interact with your fiscal or accounting folks, if you're like a program person, go say hello to them and make friends because that really does help make sure this program runs efficiently and sets you up for a strong foundation. And technology and records, of course. We are moving away from, paper, everything to digitally storing things. Not to say that you can't do one or the other or both, but just making sure that your technology allows you to create accurate invoices, tracks things that need to be tracked. If you have any questions about what you're currently using, please bring that up in your next TA call with our lovely team of experts. And then we also introduced a staff mapping tool so that you can kind of get a landscape of who does what currently and what you would need to add to your list of never-ending tasks, which I'm sure they all are for us, and sort of what things would be needed to make sure that those things are accomplished. So like if, I don't know, Barbara, you're closest on my screen, if you're doing, 19 out of the 20 things listed on there, that might be something to consider, right? Because you're just one person, for example. So that was the point of that tool. I just have a couple of questions. Has anyone made progress walking through this tool?
Well, I feel like you peeped at mine when you said that.
I
That
didn't,
I'm
I didn't,
listed
I
as
swear I
not.
didn't.
Okay. Well, the funny thing is, or the not, I can't say the dog ate my homework, but this morning, I was working on this a little bit, just finishing it up, and something happened and I lost the
Oh,
entire thing. So Chris came in and tried to help me. Anyway, I'll get it filled back out. I still have most of my answers in my head
oh,
and we'll be good to go. I'll have it by by our individual session.
oh man.
Put
Look,
back together.
I had a similar issue where I couldn't send the PDF for the slide deck to the SJI team here. I kept getting bounce backs no matter what I did, and I was like, I give up. I don't know. I don't know. So I feel you.
But we are blessed to have really good systems in place already. So the majority of this is stuff we're already doing around wraparound supports or what have you. So it should be easy to just slide this right in.
Fantastic. Love to hear it. Anyone else? Anyone stuck? There's more people on the call than just Barbara, you guys. You can drop it in the chat.
There's a couple of us that are with Barbara, so
Yeah, I was the one that wasn't able to help her, but she noted.
Oh, can
Oh,
you tell them
and
what
do
the
have
PDF
Karen to
from?
introduce herself. Karen is our new program manager
Welcome.
for our EDA recompete.
I will
thank you.
add you to our email list.
Thank you.
If you could just drop your email in the chat so I have
Yep.
it, that'd be great. Welcome. All right, guys. So we are going to jump right into all things fiscal. I'm going to hand it over to Dina from SJI
All
to kick
right.
us off.
Thank you, Samantha. Yeah, welcome everyone. Glad to see you all here today. And we're going to start off first looking at our handy Venn diagram. You obviously will recognize this from our other presentations. We use this quite often. And this Venn diagram really shows the 4 key areas that really need to come together and be aligned for sort of that area in the middle where we see the green square, which is the best opportunity for reimbursement. But today we're going to talk about funds, and we'll move on to the next. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the type of employment and training funds, and you see 2 columns here. One is 100% funds and the other is 50% reimbursement, or we sometimes refer to it as 50-50 funds. And these funds come from the feds, and the 100% funds really are sent to states to start, implement, and operate an E&T program across the state. And so all states receive this funding, and it's based on a formula. And then the other column is about the 50-50 funds. So that's about reimbursement. So you're reimbursing your SNAP E&T services program costs, and this is outside of the 100% funding. And it does include reimbursement on supportive services. And it's funds that will reimburse you for the services that you're providing. And on to the next slide. And then next, really sort of an explanation about non-federal funding. So you'll hear us say this a lot, that the E&T services are really based on the fact that you have access to non-federal funding. And non-federal funding then makes it eligible for you to reimburse up to 50% of the services that you paid for up front with that non-federal funding. And so these are some examples of non-federal funding, which probably look familiar to you all. Local or county or city dollars are non-federal funding, as long as it's not a pass-through. Earned income, whether that's revenue for social enterprise. You may have corporate gifts or individual donors who are gifting money to your agency, and then perhaps grants from outside foundations. And then the only federal fund that is eligible for reimbursement under the E&T program is CDBG, and that it's in statute, and so it's the only one federal fund that is eligible for reimbursement. Let me go to the next slide. And so this is a graphic of our funding cycle. And what this really represents is you as the agency, the E&T provider, spending your non-federal funds up front. And you'll see here in this graphic, this funding cycle, that spending $1,000 up front of your non-federal funding then becomes eligible for reimbursement up to 50%. And so essentially you would get that $500 back, which is 50% of the $1,000. And then we encourage you to reinvest that into your E&T services. And as it comes back around of that $500, then you continually reimburse upon that. And as you can see, receiving back 250 of that 500 initially spent. So like I said, it's a reimbursement program for the E&T services that you're providing. And you're paying for those services up front with your non-federal funding. All right, go on.
Any questions about that? Is that making sense? Yeah, Barbara?
So, but we can use that money for whatever we would wish to, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, you can. And you know, it comes back with, you know, no federal status, so it's unrestricted funding, so you can do with it what you want. It's reinvesting it, reutilizing it back into your E&T services is the best way to grow your program. So that's why we encourage you to do so. But if you find in the beginning that it's just not feasible for you to be able to do that, I mean, again, we've seen agencies who put some of that money away and save the funding over time, and reinvest the other part of it. We've seen with those saved funding sources, you know, then over time they're able to hire somebody to sort of fill in for some of those additional tasks that you probably have seen on the staff mapping tool. So those are additional tasks to what you're already doing. And if you find over time that you'll need somebody, that's a way to pay for that.
Good question. Other questions? All right. So drop in the chat, how confident are you at identifying funding that could be used as your SNAP E&T sort of match or non-federal source of funding? A, very confident, B, somewhat confident, neutral, or D, not very confident. No wrong answers here. How are we feeling? Drop it in the chat or come off mute. A, okay. Ooh, B, good. Anyone want to come off mute? A, ooh, look at us. This is exciting. Great. A lot of A's. Yay.
I did the A just because Barb did.
Anyone else want to respond before we move on? All right, guys. Back to Dina.
Yes, and so this is a graphic really showing you how to assess your potential reimbursement. So first and foremost, starting out paying for those services that you're already providing that align with E&T. You're paying with those with non-federal funding. It has to be tied to an employment and training activity, which is the approved components or activities that we've talked before about. And then tied to the services that come along with that, and then is tied to the participant, to, you know, that who is eligible for food benefits, and then all of that is then eligible for reimbursement.
Questions here. We have another graphic coming up that also goes a little bit deeper into this. But essentially everything is tied to what you're doing that's eligible, and then that drives your budget and reimbursement potential. All right. No questions? Moving right along. So next up we have budgeting, and I believe Andrew, you're taking this section over?
Yeah. I'm taking the exciting parts. This is where we're starting the crazy train for sure, right, everybody? Um, okay.
Yeah, so question number 2. I want to know about Eastern Action said D. Are you answering this question or the first one?
Which one do you want? Actually, I'm
The-
answering this one. I already answered the first one.
Okay.
Hey,
Gotcha. So, which best describes your experience creating budgets? And again, no wrong answer here. Just trying to get a temperature check. You've never created a budget before, or you've provided input but haven't maybe built one. C, I have independently created and managed budgets. Or D, I've created multiple budgets and regularly manage the budgets and planning. Let's see, we have some B's and. Okay, so we're all over the map here. That's good. So hopefully these next few slides will be helpful for folks. Great.
Just to put everybody at ease as well, Samantha, Dina, and I just had a conversation yesterday about speaking accountant or, understanding accounting principles and things like that. None of us did this in school. None of us did this, really it was learning on the job and kind of figuring it out. So as long as you're not in the, I've never heard of what a budget is before, you're going to be okay. This is really a really important piece of this budget. And even just before we get into identifying things, a really important piece is just understanding your programs, understanding what in your programming and of your participants can be a part of this program. And that's a really big step in it. So to put you all who are not financial folks at ease, that's kind of something that could just be really helpful just to understand the type of work that you do. So let's go ahead and jump into it. To start out with, this is just going to be kind of a summary, how we're going to start talking about this. So really what we're looking at is how are we getting from your overall organizational budget in number 1 through number 2, thinking about, specifically the training programs that you're providing, those programs that align with generally SNAP E&T, right? So those really training programs could include WIOA, could include other federally funded programs, before we get to number 3, where we're talking about those that actually potential E&T budget. So those training programs that are non-federally funded. And then lastly, looking at the actual E&T budget, thinking through workforce programs or training programs that are non-federally funded and offered to SNAP participants. So this is another way of looking at the center of that green box in the middle of the Venn diagram. This is where all those overlaps happen. So this is what we're going to work through a little bit in the coming slides. So let's go ahead and jump to the next one. So basically looking at types of funding sources, this is just an example where we would have like a WIOA or any other federally funded program. We're going to set that to the side. Those can't be included in this program, but they're good to know about. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But any private donations, foundation grants, other non-federal county, city, municipal grants, things like that, enterprise revenue. So this is where we're looking at a sample budget, crossing out those federal pieces and looking at what we have left to apply to this. In looking at this, again, this is that high level. So some of these foundation grants might go for something else that is, like mental health related, or some private donations going for housing or something like that. So this is, again, just identifying those non-federal sources and looking at the total that we have available. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at the administrative costs. So this isn't even the participant stuff yet, right? We'll get to that. That's where a lot of our heads are thinking about this program, but how do we make this program work? So starting with salaries and benefits, you can include a lot of different staff members. The staff mapping tool might have helped identify some of those. But thinking about obviously case managers, right? Your frontline staff, that's who we kind of have in mind. But who manages those folks and what oversight do they have on the program? How much support does your fiscal staff? How much support does your other management staff? HR can be included here if they're involved in especially hiring, if you do a subsidized work-based learning and your participants are paid and there's an HR staff that walks them through and kind of gives them orientation. Think about kind of upfront administrative staff. Think about if you have intake staff, people working phones, taking intake. Like there's a lot of people we can think about who may be included here. Also, we've talked a little bit about starting small and growing. We've talked about kind of this initial budget being your very best attempt at putting a budget together in a very different type of program. We're talking right now about like year one, how are we putting the budget together? But think about kind of continuous improvement. Think about how you can track some of these things over time. So if you don't know how your HR staff is going to be involved with the program in year one, you may not include them in your budget. But over the course of that year, you may identify, oh, they're doing a lot of work for this program. Let's include them in the second year budget, right? So think about what you're comfortable doing up front when you're putting a budget together, and think about how that can grow over time, especially in that salaries and benefits, identifying those staff. Next, there's administrative pieces. If you rent or lease a building, if you own it, sorry, you can't do that. But if you rent or lease, utilities, internet, telecommunications, all of those pieces. If you have insurance on your building, or if you need to buy insurance because you operate your employment social enterprise, that can be included as well. Office supplies, if you know that your staff needs new laptops next year, all of those types of things can be built in because those are helping, the administration of the program, keeping that program going. Lastly, we've got, any training, any travel expenses. If you go out to work sites, if you go, maybe to like a library to provide services, to be closer to your participants, all of that mileage to support your program, to bring services to people, are eligible. If you have conferences or other training, especially if you can tie it to SNAP E&T. We just talked to a provider that we work with who needed to provide additional information on a training to indicate that it was related to SNAP E&T that they billed for. So think about how those can be related. If there's, motivational interviewing training that your frontline staff are doing or something like that, that may be pretty, closely related. In addition to lodging, hotel, things like that as you're doing those trainings or professional development. And then lastly, indirect expenses. You'll want to kind of think about if you're taking the de minimis because you don't have a federally approved rate, you want to talk to your state to say what is included in that, what may we include in that, right? But if you have a federally negotiated rate, that should indicate what's included in that rate versus what you're able to bill separately.
There's a good question in the chat, and I'll defer to the TA team or Leroy if you also want to jump in here. It says, are you able to negotiate an indirect rate with USDA, or are you required to use the de minimis rate? For-profits generally run higher than non-profits. Team?
If you have a federally negotiated rate, you are required to use it, even if it's below 15%. And that stinks because if the de minimis is higher, you'd be able to get that instead. But yeah, so if the NICRA or the federally negotiated rate is something that you have, you're required to use that rate.
But do they, I want to answer the first part of the question. Are you able to negotiate an indirect rate with USDA?
I think that the federally negotiated rate is through, is it the federal
a
budget
different
office?
cognizant agency, right?
I think that it applies across all agency
Leroy?
contracts.
I truly do not know the answer to that.
I believe it's any like federal entity that you have a procurement relationship with can approve a that rate for you. It's not just USDA. I can take a look at ours and see who is that agency and put that in our follow-up email if that would be helpful for folks. But that's a great question.
So this is Matt. You have to have a direct award from an agency.
Yes.
Then that becomes, and I guess if you negotiate one, then that becomes your cognizant agency. And like Andrew said, everybody has to respect it. They're supposed to.
Yes,
But with these,
they're required
SNAP
to.
funds coming, at least here in West Virginia, they come through the state. That's not a direct federal relationship, and therefore you don't have a direct relationship
Yeah.
with a federal fund.
I'll get it succinct in the email follow-up so you have that as a reference, just so there's no confusion or and then there's clarity. But that's a great question.
Also a great question to ask your state if they have an opinion on it. Scott, do you currently have an approved rate through some contract that you have?
We did with the older company. I had SBIRs with USDA, and we were able, I mean, it was a nightmare, but we were able to negotiate a rate. But mid-process, they switched from doing their own negotiations and started using the Department of Interior as the cognizant agency to do it. And well, not going into a lot of detail, but they were not set up for for-profits. SBIR is specifically for-profit businesses, and it was a nightmare. So that's one of the reasons I was asking. But the other question that was answered, since this isn't a direct program with the federal agency, then yeah, we would have to have it from another source. So yeah,
sure. And some state agencies default to what you have rather than using de minimis. But again, ask the question of your state. They'll be able to provide an answer. Yeah.
Yeah. And usually it's not being too low. It's just that before USDA was 10%, and then a couple of years they raised it to 15%.
Just bumped up. Yep, you're right. You're right.
Most de minimis is that, or most negotiated rates for profits usually are 40% or higher. So
yeah, we've seen that same thing with colleges as well. Colleges have a pretty high one, but nonprofits tend to have a pretty low rate across the board. Yeah. So think about what that might mean if you don't currently have a negotiated rate too. If 15% seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Scott. Also, I think that we should put this on every slide ever. Down at the bottom, allowable costs are different state to state. So some may offer different allowable costs than others. For the most part, with administrative costs, if you have good reasoning for why it's included in your budget, it's approved because you are experiencing that cost and it's part of running your program. So a narrative really goes a long way with those. Next slide, please. Okay. So allowable cost example. So looking at staff salaries, there are different ways to determine staff salaries here, but there's a few ways to get to it. So first, you want to kind of consider how much of each staff member's time is dedicated to duties that are E&T eligible. And that means both funding and the type of activities. So if you have a frontline staff, a case manager who also does some counseling, some mental health counseling, that mental health counseling proportion, 25% say, is not eligible to be included in these calculations because it's not an eligible expense in E&T. Or if you have someone who does all workforce stuff, that's all eligible, but 50% of that is paid for by WIOA, you'll need to set that aside as well, right? So it's only the tasks that are eligible in E&T and paid for by eligible expenses. So that's the job duties. The next step is thinking about how much of those job duties are going to be dedicated to SNAP E&T clients. So there's two ways to do this. First, there's direct service hours. So that's turning in a timesheet with the number of hours spent serving SNAP E&T clients, working on SNAP E&T invoicing, doing SNAP E&T documentation, case notes, things like that, right? Directly related. As far as budget, so that's kind of on the invoicing side, right? That's easy. You know how to do a timesheet. On the budgeting side, how do we determine this, right? So it's really considering how much of that time could be SNAP E&T related based on how many participants you would expect that person to serve and how much time they would be serving those individuals, or thinking about how much time it may take for your financial staff to do invoicing for this program or to collect documentation for this program. It really is an estimate, right? Especially in this first budget that you're looking to do. Again, similar to looking at those staff that you can add potentially in the second or third year. You'll want to keep data on all this stuff to make sure that you're hitting it pretty accurately for your next round of budgeting. The second way to look at, so that's direct service, direct hours. The second is caseload or participant ratio. And that's where you would look at the number of participants you would project to be in your SNAP E&T program in a numerator divided by the number of total participants in that workforce program. So let's say that you have a workforce program where you provide construction training. You have a cohort of 25. I'm going to use a round number so I can get an easier percentage. A cohort of 100 or 100 over the course of the year in that program. And you project 25 of those individuals are going to be E&T eligible. Your participant ratio would then be 25%, your projected participant ratio, right? And so for that percentage, that's what you would be able to apply to the salary and benefits for those individuals who you're using the participant ratio for, especially for billing purposes. Budgeting purposes. So you would look at that individual. So for the participant ratio, you would look at the percentage of the job duties that are E&T eligible, and then the participant ratio that you've determined, and the result of those would be what would go onto your budget. This is kind of a challenging one to project as well. It's difficult to tell how many people, we've talked about projecting the number of people you see potentially enrolling in your program over the course of the next year. Again, this is one of those that's going to be maybe a shot in the dark at first. But if you can use data to determine about how many people you have served in previous years who are eligible for SNAP and receiving SNAP and going through your programs, you can start to kind of determine a really good estimate for what this may look like. So a couple of important considerations at the bottom. The methodology you choose, whether it's direct service hours or participant ratio in your budget for an individual staff member, needs to stay consistent when you bill for that staff member over the course of the year. So if you have a frontline case manager and they're doing the participant ratio method, that needs to be how they're billed every month or every quarter, however your state does invoicing. And if you have like a fiscal staff that does direct service hours, that's how they would be expected to be billed over the course of that year. Again, can be a reconsideration when you do your budget for the following year. If you do a participant ratio and you find that that's about 25% for a frontline staff, but they actually end up hours-wise using about 50% of their time, think about that for how the next year looks and how you want to change that for the next year. There's no specific guide on types of roles that may use one or the other. So it's kind of good to do a calculation for both for many of your staff members and see which one kind of comes out higher or makes more sense to you. One consideration that we didn't include at the bottom is if you're going to do direct service hours and you're going to have a timesheet or a time study done, consider your staff members who it might be more difficult to get to do a timesheet on time every month, because then the participant ratio might make sense too. So there's all these little considerations that you can think about as you're putting your budget together. As with everything, that second point down there under considerations must be supported by appropriate documentation. That's for any expense that you incur and want to submit for invoicing. Should clearly demonstrate how the percentage was determined, and looking at the lists of eligible individuals that you'll be working with, you'll be able to document that. In addition to thinking about your total number of people you serve, if you have cohorts, if you have classes, if you have just a total number on a caseload, make sure that that's documented, but also recognize individuals who are not involved in this program. You want to make sure that you maintain confidentiality for those folks as well. And then salary and benefits should be allocated using, this same methodology whenever possible. If you find that your entire staff, it makes sense to do participant ratio, it may be easier to budget and to invoice each month, but it may not be as financially beneficial. So think through all these considerations. Obviously, we're here to help if you need help kind of looking through this for budgeting and as invoicing comes along. I'm going to just stop there and see if there are any questions on this, or if you want to write down all of your questions for our next TA meeting, that's fine too. But any questions on this piece?
Also, this slide is meant to be a reference. Doc, I know it's very wordy, but we do post them on our landing page, so you'll always have this to look back at.
We can also provide samples of what this might look like in a budget. So that sometimes is helpful to see too.
No question.
Let's move on. We might get some at the end, Sam. Don't go too early. So next slide, please. So now looking at other types of allowable costs, and again, that star's down at the bottom. That cost may be different from state to state. Also be considerate of maximum allowable reimbursements in your state. Transportation, we see that sometimes in addition to emergency housing. But for all of these types of expenses, many of these you're already providing. We generally recommend don't start providing a bunch of extras up front. Provide what you provide. If you find that your reimbursement allows for additional opportunities for maybe offering dependent care where you haven't been able to before, or offering laptops for people who need them that you've never been able to offer before. But think about these expenses and how you may be able to offer them. Again, just like the previous slide said, documentation is really key here as well for justification of need, making sure that they occurred in the month you're billing for, that the person received it, and that it was paid for by non-federal funds. Those are all going to be key pieces, and those will all come when you learn about how invoicing works in your states as well. We can talk more about that in our individual TA meetings as well for those documentation purposes, and also how to kind of identify these expenses. Think about the path that these expenses need to travel from identifying a participant needs a bus pass all the way through to make sure it's documented, to make sure it's added to an invoice and billed to your state. So these are all processes that we can talk more about in our TA meetings as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So for those of you who are who have subsidized work-based learning and offer your participants wages, those are eligible depending on your state. We'll look at that in the next slide. But your participant wages, in some states, stipends are allowed. Some states they're not. So that's one of those pieces that a stipend is not directly applied, I think is generally how they talk about them. But if it's allowed in your state as an offset to other expenses for folks, great. If you offer those, those are reimbursable. Along with the hourly wages paid to your participants, you can look to payroll taxes, workman's comp, other fringe benefits as well. The eligible activities where we see participant wages being eligible are for transitional jobs, paid work experience, internships, pre-apprenticeships, apprenticeships, all of the work-based learning components. So those are things to look at in your state plan to determine what may be available in your state. And then the documentation for those. Again, documentation is key. So timesheets, payroll records, wage rates, any other eligibility documentation you need to include, and then activity records. You'll also this isn't necessarily financial, but something else you want to keep in mind for documenting is the skills gains that these individuals are experiencing. Those may come into play as well. Next slide, please. So we don't have all of these components in each state represented here in our cohort. Work activity is offered. That looks a little bit different than the work-based learning, but something you can also look into. But looking at the work-based learning components, Kentucky has 2 available, one of which offers subsidized wages. Ohio has transitional jobs that offer subsidized wages. Ohio also has a general work-based learning component that offers subsidized wages as well, which is kind of unique to Ohio. Virginia has none yet, and then West Virginia has a few options, but none are subsidized yet. I keep saying yet because it may be the case that there haven't been good options for the state for providers who do these types of things in the E&T program. So it's worth having the conversation with your state folks. Even though it's not here now, they update their state plan every year as well. So they have the opportunity to add in here. We also have a lot of examples on what these look like from other states that we can share or have, support your conversations with your state about these potentially additional components. So feel free to have those conversations, ask those questions in our TA meetings as well. But from my understanding, most of the folks in the room offer one of these types of components. So we can talk more about that as well, again, in TA meetings. All right. So allowable cost examples for services and activities. These are tied to allowable E&T activities. And again, we're kind of narrowing this budget. So it's going from your whole budget to your workforce budget to now your E&T focused budget, right? So these are the activities and allowable costs in E&T. So think about all of the case management that you're currently doing, any job readiness training, work experience, any credential training, if you do anything like that, in addition to your supportive services. Those are all pieces that you can really dig into that are closely aligned. You've done the services mapping tool. You've done the staff mapping tool. That's a really good way at focusing in on what you can do here. Again, that stars at the bottom. They differ from state to state. So make sure that you're just aware of what's allowable as far as supportive services, as far as what components and activities are available. Speaking of that question, Scott has a question here. Outside of Appalachia, are there other states that offer as much as West Virginia? Some offer every one of those options. Some offer none of them. So it really does vary state to state. Generally, programs that E&T programs in a state that are more established, have more providers, tend to have more opportunities for different types of components as well. But Scott, if you're kind of curious about any individual components, let us know. We can probably find 5 or 6 states that offer it and have a good definition in their state plan that you'd be able to consider and bring to your state as well. Okay. So now we're to number 4. Now we're taking all of those pieces that we just thought about and narrowing it down to the actual projection of people that you expect to be in your SNAP E&T program. So down to the bottom of the triangle. Hopefully this isn't a giant top tier triangle and a tiny little bottom of your pyramid. So hopefully this is a little bit larger budget than what it looks like here. But these are the allowable expenses. These are the services you're providing that are eligible in E&T to eligible participants with eligible funding. And you have all of that aligned and approved in your state. It seems like a long road to go, and it kind of is. But as you start looking at budget forms, as you start considering those other tools, it's really going to come into focus. And we've seen it happen, right? Sam and Dina, we've seen it happen. So really, all of the work you're doing is leading us to this point. And at the bottom, allowable costs are different from state to state. So keep that in mind. All right. Next question. How are we feeling about all of this information that we went through?
It's a lot.
Feeling good? Getting there?
It is a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, we tried
Yeah.
to boil it down to the basics, but also included enough in the slides so that you can reference it back. And then follow-up conversations with your TA team through the end of September are, of course, encouraged and scheduled for most of you.
And we have kind of sample budget forms. They're not exactly the ones you would submit to your state, but it would at least be numbers on a screen that you could see with names of people you know at your organization and services that you offer. And sometimes just seeing what that looks like is really helpful. So those are things that we can kind of talk about and work through as well, especially for those of you, again, who are not the accounting and financial minded folks. Sometimes you just kind of need to see a sample.
No one said I'm lost. That's great.
Well, I think the I'm lost maybe here just hasn't answered. We only have 3 answers. That's okay. That's okay. We're all getting there together.
Okay, so we're going to transition a little bit. I'm going to keep this slide up and have our good friend Aaron from CEO come on. Once this slide's finished, he's going to share screen. So take it away.
Hi, thanks, Samantha, and thanks, Andrew. That was amazing. And, yes, the budgeting and finance piece, especially if you're not that finance person in the room, can be a little bit intimidating. But I promise you,
Aaron, I can't hear you very well. Can you maybe speak
no.
up a little bit?
Yeah. Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just saying that the budgeting can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you're not a finance person. But as Andrew said, there are tools out there that can kind of help walk you through that. And actually, I'd like to walk through one of those tools with you really quick while we still have a little bit of time. And like Andrew said, like it's very helpful for you to kind of go through this exercise. And I would almost say, maybe get an initial budget earlier than later, because when you want to get to that last triangle that he was showing you, you want to know like what your opportunity is. And for some program operators, they might get there after they pulled out all their federal funding sources and they've identified their staff that they can actually allocate the SNAP E&T. You might find out that it's not that much money, that the effort, as Sam likes to say, is the juice worth the squeeze. And so doing one of these budgeting out templates is really helpful for you kind to identify whether that juice is worth the squeeze. But this slide right here that we have up, and I know the font is probably a little bit small, but it kind of shows you that timeline and that process on where all of this works in getting your program approved with SNAP E&T. And that first thing is you need to submit your proposal to the state and submit that with the budget. And that state agency is going to take that and they're going to review it. And they might ask you questions, they might have some follow-ups, but ultimately, what they're going to do is they're going to take your budget and they're going to roll it into their own state plan, and they're going to then submit everything to FNS. That generally happens no later than August 15th, and FNS, FNA now as they're calling it, is going to take that state plan and they're going to review it. And there might also have some questions as well that they're going to follow down to the state. And so the state can, at any point in time in that process, follow back up with you and ask follow-up questions. After that, the state is going to get approval from the state, from FNS for their state plan. And then the state's then going to award you your budget. And if there were any kind of modifications that were made or adjustments, you would then see what those modifications are and what your award is. They'd issue you a contract generally outlining all of the responsibilities that you're going to undertake when you engage in this. And then finally, the end goal is that on October 1, you have an approved state plan, you're an approved provider, an executed contract, and you're ready to go. So that is just so you understand that general flow and the process. So what I'd like to do really quick while we have some time is I want to show you a sample budget tool that we can use, and I'll pull this up right now. And so I just want to make sure you can all see my screen. Perfect. So a couple of things I want to say about this budget template real quick is it does assume a client ratio allocation methodology. So not using that time and effort billing where you're taking timesheets. Although again, the purpose of this is just for you to get an idea of, is the juice worth the squeeze? What are your SNAP E&T related costs? And how do you identify what that is? So this budget template is just tabbed with every kind of walking you through the process. And then there's also an instruction guide that kind of walks you through every single tab, telling you what you need to include and maybe what things you might want to make sure that you don't include, so that you're building a SNAP E&T compliant budget. So the first thing that we try to identify, especially when we're using that client ratio methodology, is how many participants are you planning to serve in your employment and training program, and how many of those do you expect to be receiving SNAP E&T. And so in this example, we're using a social enterprise that's running a cafe, and they're training their participants on culinary skills, hospitality skills. They're receiving like Safe Serve certification and everything for them to kind of enter into a culinary or hospitality industry. So they're anticipating that they're going to serve a total of 30 participants, and 25 of those are going to be receiving SNAP. And that gives them an eligibility rate of approximately 83.33%. And just keep that 83.33% in mind. And I'll show you how that then translates to the rest of this. Then there's a fringe rate calculator, because we're going to be billing SNAP E&T for your staff time and salaries. And then part of that, you have employer costs, your share of Social Security, Medicare, workers' compensation, healthcare, dental. So you want to know what are all those fringe benefits costing your organization to pay your employees, and that gets you to that fringe rate at the bottom, and in this case it's 20.65%. And so identifying that when you're billing your staff time to SNAP E&T, it's going to be their salaries plus that 20.65% for those additional costs, so that it can budget that fringe rate in. And then this is the tab that talks about allocating your staff E&T time. And this is, I think, is probably one of the most important tabs that you want to focus on, because you really want to be diligent in identifying all of the staff members that you plan to bill for in your SNAP E&T program, and identifying what their roles and responsibilities are, because you need to separate out anything that they're doing that's not SNAP E&T related. So a lot of program providers, they're offering multiple services outside of just SNAP E&T. Maybe they're providing mental health services, as an example, that's not employment and training related. And you have staff members that are going in and out of that program, whether they're providing the mental health piece, and then the other part is they're doing like the social enterprise employment and training piece. You want to identify all of those positions and then map out through your staff mapping, just like you had done through our staff mapping, what is E&T related activities and what is not. So in this case, just as an example, position 1, we have the cafe manager. And it states like what their roles and responsibilities are. And you see that they have a gross salary of 65, almost 66,000. But from there, you're going to identify, well, what activities are they doing that are SNAP E&T related, and what are those that they are doing that are not? And if you see here, after you've broken that out, it gets us down to here at the bottom, where we've mapped out 100% of all their activities, so we've accounted for all of their time. And for this particular position, 50% of their time is non-SNAP E&T related, while the other 50% of their time is. So then, taking that full gross amount, it then says, okay, well, 50% is SNAP E&T. So that means $32,992.50 is what is available SNAP E&T activities. And then from there, you're going to take that participant eligibility rate, that client ratio. So coming back to that participant serve tab where we're saying how many participants we're serving, you take that 33,000 approximate and you apply the 83%. It gets you a total amount for that position of what you're budgeting and you believe are eligible expenses that you would actually bill to SNAP E&T. And of course, under a 50-50, you would essentially get 50% of that back. So for every position, if you do that, so you go to the next position, and then for this person, it's also a 50-50. So it allocates that much, and you go into the next position. So every person that's participating in your SNAP E&T program that you're going to be billing for, you would want to perform this activity so you kind of have a good idea. This also can help serve the basis for your cost allocation when you actually go into the invoicing for how much percentage of their time are you actually billing to SNAP E&T. So just pause right there. What we can do afterwards, because I know we're short on time, is we can do some follow-up TA work with you if you have some questions about the templates, or if you want to stay after the session and ask some follow-up. So the next thing that we want to do is the big thing. We're covering the big expenses is your rent and utilities. So in this one, and your state might provide you alternative budget worksheets that they want you to use for calculating this. But in this one, what it's doing is it's taking, okay, I'm leasing a space of 5,700 square feet. It wants you to identify then, is there any space that you're not using for employment and training activities? Again, in that example where I said maybe you have some mental health operations that are going on, and you have some mental health therapists on site that they're using office space. Well, that's not going to be employment and training related, so you need to be able to back that space out because you can't charge the cost of that space to SNAP E&T. So once you've identified what is your SNAP E&T space, then the calculator then says, okay, well, 79% of your total space is being allocated to SNAP E&T. And then on top of that, it's also then again going to that client ratio, 83%, and allocating your total annual rent to what is going to be your ultimate budgeted amount that you believe you'll be able to bill to SNAP E&T. So in this case, we have a $73,000 annual rent. And when you run it through all the calculator, it gets you down to a 48,000 is going to be SNAP E&T. And that roughly estimates out to about $2,000 a month that you would actually get reimbursed. So it's not insignificant, right? It's a decent amount that is a potential reimbursement for you. And then it does the exact same thing for your utility expenses. And then we'll come over to our operating expenses. So these are going to be the expenses that you would directly relate to your SNAP E&T program, already excluding out expenses that are not related. And then that's especially important if you have shared expenses where you have a copy machine and it's supporting your entire operation. You need to be able to figure out how much of that copy machine's expense goes to your SNAP E&T program only versus how much of that is supporting other functions that aren't SNAP E&T related. Once you identify those, you can plug all of those into here. And then again, it allocates again based off of that SNAP percentage of participants in your program, 83.33%, and it figures out what those totals are. We're almost done, I promise. Then you're going to look into your supportive services, your participant reimbursements. These are the supports that you're going to be offering to your participants in your SNAP E&T program. And again, participant reimbursements, as you need to make sure that you're only including those that are directly related to your employment and training program. A lot of organizations are offering participant supports that might be giving them transportation to mental health appointments, might be giving them transportations to court, transportation to medical appointments. Those are generally not allowable SNAP E&T expenses because they're not related to their employment and training directly. So if you're doing transportation to and from training, or you're doing transportation to and from a job interview, those would be employment and training related expenses. So you want to make sure that you identify only your participant supports that employment and training related. Once you identify that and you understand your annual costs, you'd plug that into here. And then we get to the grand finale, which is your budget. So everything in these tabs fill into your total budget here. So all of those positions that you filled out in your staff, your staff allocations, it populates into here. It allocates out what their staff time that was SNAP E&T. It shows you here. It then gives you your client ratio, and then you ultimately get over to what is your SNAP E&T total after applying that fringe rate calculation. So in this case, we have $146,000 of this social enterprises staff salaries and time being eligible in their budget for SNAP E&T. Bring in the occupancy expenses, $74,678 eligible for that. Their operating expenses of OTPS pulls that in. Indirect cost, this assumes that they're taking the de minimis, so it's applying that 15% de minimis rate, and then participant reimbursements down here. It summarizes everything here, so your total budget of your costs directly related to your employment and training is going to be the $229,000 roughly, and then this local versus federal is just showing the match. So you can expect to be able to be reimbursed if everything in this is going to be SNAP E&T eligible and you're able to bill. You have a potential for $115,000 reimbursement. So this is a great tool to use to kind of figure out what your potential is for running your program and how much of your program could you expect to receive if you were contracting with the state. So that's all I have with that. I will say with this template, we do have a nice little instruction guide that kind of walks you through each of these tabs and tells you what to kind of look out for, what not to look out for, what do you want to avoid including, just to kind of guide you through that process. But yeah, that's all I have for that. And I know we are over time, so I will kick it back over to Samantha. And if you have any questions, then I'm definitely happy to stay a little late for that.
All right, guys, let me just reconfigure my screens really quickly here. So I know we're over time. I really appreciate, it looks like almost everyone stayed on. Just very quickly, our final cohort-wide session is next month. If you have any questions, please, you can reach out to me or your technical assistance team. I have a couple minutes I can hang on. I'm gonna stop share or stop recording. And